Coming into his 12th NBA season, James Harden already ranks 5th overall in the all-time three-point shooters list. He strikes me as the type of guy that will have a pretty long peak given his style of play, especially considering the fact that he's never really had a big season-ending injury. So let's say he has 3 more prime seasons left. He's averaged 3.7, 4.8, and 4.4 threes per game in these past 3 years. So let's use the average of that, 4.3, for this simulation. So Harden averages 4.3 threes made per game in the first 3 years of this experiment, and slowly begins to fall off in the next few years. He averages 3.7 in 2024, then 3.1, then 3.0, and then starts officially taking smaller non-number 1 option roles on teams, averaging 2.0 and then finally 1.6 threes per game in his final 2 years. This is what I see to be a realistic amount of games played for Harden in these final 8 years of his career, suffering very little injuries due to the fact that that's simply been the case for him as of 2020. The final result, 1,886 three-pointers being added on to his already established total of 2,324 threes. That's a total of 4,210 three-pointers, well over Ray Allen's career total of 2,973. And Harden's not alone with this abnormal amount of made threes. As a matter of fact, Ray Allen's current record is about to get passed by countless NBA players. Let's go and check out where this leaderboard will be by the year 2030 by looking at some of the league's best three-point bombers and simulating where they will be by the end of the decade.
Long-range missile for LeBron James. Timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
The obvious other name that is already dominating this list is Steph Curry. I'll give him 5 more seasons in the league, meaning that he'll have a 16-year career. He averaged 4.6 threes in his prime from 2016 to 2019, and I think that number will be slightly lower as he reaches the end of his career. We'll say he averages 4.1 threes in 2021, and then 3.7, 3.5, 2.8, and finally 2.0 in his final NBA season. These, in my mind, are the appropriate games played amount for this guy, given his injury-plagued history. And with that, Curry now has 3,438 career threes. Klay Thompson, Curry's backcourt teammate, has been having a couple tough years, so his career total might not be as preposterous. His threes per game numbers have pretty much always been around the low threes, somewhere around 3.0 to 3.5 per game. Let's give him 3.1 per game for 2022, assuming he misses all of 2021. Then 3.1 again for 2023, 2.5 in 2024 and 2025 as he declines, and then 3 more very mediocre years with pretty low three-pointer numbers. Throw on my games played prediction, and the total you get is 2,883 threes. Now, that might not sound like a lot compared to the other guys we've tried this out on, but that's still enough to pass Reggie freaking Miller and rank 4th all-time in threes made in our adjusted leaderboard. Damian Lillard is a completely different story. His numbers are the definition of preposterous. He still has a lot of his peak left, let's say 6 more years of it, in which he averages 3.7 threes per game in each year. He averaged 4.1 per game last season, and that was by far a career high. So it's fair to say that his per game numbers will average out at about a little bit lower than what he was at last year for the remainder of his peak. And with that, let's say he has a 17-year career. He'll decline gracefully and not have too many injury-prone years, given that, at least as of 2020, he's been a healthy player. This leaves him with 4,143 three-pointers, second all-time, above Steph Curry and only below James Harden. Harden. Paul George's numbers are up there as well. In recent years, he's been knocking down around 3+ threes per game. So let's say he does that for 3 more years, then plays 3 more seasons to cap off a 16-year NBA career. Following the trend of his past, George does have a few more injuries than many of the other players we've listed, and he ends up with a total of 2,694 career triples, and that's with me not really being all that generous. Surprisingly enough, LeBron James currently ranks 15th all-time in threes. His averages aren't as high as some of the other guys, but his longevity has really carried this career total. He's averaged around 2 per game in the past 2 seasons, so let's say he does that for 2 more years as he continues to adjust and change his game. I'm going to predict that LeBron has 5 more years left in the tank, and for the next final 3, the averages decline a little bit, but never so drastically. That's gonna be 592 more career threes added on to his old total, equaling out at a total of 2,470 triples. That's 8th all time, at least for the time being. Probably the only upper hand that JJ Redick has over LeBron is his career total threes made. He currently ranks 14th overall, so let's say he has 2 more good seasons in which he averages around the same numbers that he has in the past few years, and then after that has 2 more slightly worse years to finish things off. He has stayed relatively healthy throughout his career, so let's stay true to that with these games played predictions. He ends up with 2,518 threes, more than Reggie Miller. Next up is Kemba Walker. He's averaged around 3 threes per game over the past few years, so let's say he keeps this up for 3 more years before the slow fall off begins to ensue. After playing 6 more total years within the 2020s, he's now added 1,079 more threes to his career total, and now results in a career total of 2,478 threes. Kyle Lowry currently has the 23rd most threes made of all time. I think he has a few more years left of being a productive part of Toronto's rotation and potentially starting lineup, but I think his all-star years are behind him, and if they're not, well, this is definitely going to be his final season as an all-star. He's averaged between 2.4 and 3.2 threes per game during his tenure as a consistent all-star with the Raptors, so let's say he averages a little below that to finish off his career, which I'll predict will last 4 more seasons. That's gonna be 2,257 total triples, enough to rank 13th all-time, and again, this is only for the time being. Last year, Bradley Beal averaged 3.0 threes made per game. Let's say that his peak lasts for 3 more years, and then he begins to age slowly but surely over the course of the next 4. He caps off his 15-year tenure in the league with 2,545 3-pointers, 10th all-time. Kevin Durant probably doesn't have a ton of years left in the league. Let's say he lasts 5 more years and retires in the same year as LeBron and Steph Curry, in one of the most emotional off seasons in NBA history in 2025. Staying consistent with his recent 3-point averages of past seasons, consisting of anything in between 1.8 and 2.6 threes made per game, as well as his injury-prone history, I predict he's gonna end up with 2,161 career threes, slightly less than many of the other players we've simulated up to this point. I felt as if I had to bring up Kyle Korver simply due to the fact that he currently ranks 4th all-time in threes. Now, things aren't looking too great for him given the fact that he's still unsigned, but I can't see a sheer sniper like him not getting signed to some contending team eventually in the season. Last year he knocked down 99 threes, and whether it's because he gets signed halfway into the year or because he has to accept a smaller role, I'm gonna predict that that number gets sliced in half to 53s for 2021, meaning that he ends up with exactly 2,500 threes. Kyrie Irving averaged 2.8 threes a game both last year and in 2018, so let's say that he pulls off these numbers yet again for another 2 consecutive seasons before things start to slowly go downhill. He lasts a total of 6 more years in the league, playing 15 total seasons, has some nagging and semi-minor injuries like he always does, and ends up with 1,908 threes, 23rd all time. Chris Middleton has averaged 2.3 and 2.4 threes threes per game in the past 2 seasons. Let's say that he has 4 years left of his prime, consistently puts up numbers like these, and then fades off somewhat slowly and becomes pretty much just a spot-up shooter to finish off his career, which doesn't really affect his shooting numbers for obvious reasons. He's been pretty healthy up to this point into his career with the exception of a few years, so we'll just continue that trend. He'll play 7 more seasons and end off his 15-year run in the league with 1,555 three-pointers. But what about some of these younger guys? Players who shoot an astronomical amount of threes, but just haven't been around for long enough to rank high on the all-time three-pointers list. Oh man, they are about to dominate this list. First up is Buddy Hield, who out of all of these young guys ranks highest already in the all-time list as of 2020. Now, despite not playing too long in the league, he came into the NBA at 24 and is currently 27. I'm gonna say he's gonna start declining at 32 years of age, due to him having a style of play that'll serve him well for a long time. Let's say that at his peak, the 3.7 threes per game he made in 2020 can rise up to 4.4. He plays 8 more years, stays relatively healthy, and ends up with 2,877 career threes. In only a 14-year career, Hield now ranks 6th on this list. Funnily enough, D'Angelo Russell will be as old as Buddy Hield was in his rookie season this season, giving him a lot more time to take over this all-time three-pointers list. I think Russell's peak will be a little better than what he is now, and he'll consistently average around 3.3 to 3.9 threes per game in the next 5 seasons, before things get somewhat but not drastically worse. Let's say he plays the entire decade, isn't nearly as healthy as Hield, and going off of that, he's gonna knock down 2,418 triples by the year 2030. It kind of went under the radar, but Duncan Robinson's 3.7 threes made per game last season was the 9th highest average in league history. He'll be 26 this year, but nothing's stopping him from being a fantastic spot-up shooter for the next, 50 years. I'm gonna say that at his peak, he's dropping 4.3 threes per game and averaging numbers around this mark for many years to come. We don't really have enough of a sample size to determine if the guy is injury prone, so I'm just gonna say he's gonna be somewhat but not fully healthy, simply because it's the safest bet. By 2030, this man is gonna have 2,986 threes made under his belt after just 12 years in the league, and he could very well pass Harden and become the #1 all-time three-point bomber if he continues to play at this level into the early 30s, and everything about that sentence is just nuts. Trae Young was probably the first name I thought of when thinking about young three-point shooters. His 3.4 threes a game last season wasn't anything historic, but he's definitely going to improve that and eventually pass the 4.0 threes per game mark. He's probably going to play this entire decade, and probably at an all-star level for a majority of it at that. He'll have 2,814 threes made by the end of the decade, and just like pretty much everyone else I mentioned beyond this point, and also the people I mentioned before him, he'll probably end up with even more if he continues to play into the 2030s. Devonte Graham might not have as high of a ceiling as Trae Young, but he did make more threes than him in 2020. I think Graham is who he is and won't improve all that much for the future. He averaged 3.5 threes a game last year, and I can see him averaging numbers around that mark for the next 5 or so years before his window of borderline all-starness begins to dwindle. I'm gonna say that he will play the entire decade, but will be falling off by the end of it. 1,852 total threes will be made by him in 2030, passing Steve Nash, Peja Stojakovic, and Kobe. At only 20 years old, Luka Doncic has a lot of career left for him. We all know that he's the future of the league, and that his 2.8 threes made per game in 2020 will improve just like the rest of his game. This is Luka's decade, and I think his three-point numbers will be pretty consistent on a year-by-year basis. After 12 years, he'll have 2,722 made threes, falling into the same ballpark as LeBron James, in the sense that although he's not necessarily known for his jumper, due to the fact that so many other great qualities of his game overshadow it, he quietly will be climbing up this all-time list. Davis Bertans is already 27 years old, so let's say he'll have 3 more peak years before the slow decline begins. He'll retire at 34, consistently knocking down between 3.5 to 4 threes a game during the remainder of his prime, and slowly these numbers will drop. The result is 1,647 threes in in just 11 years, and the first few of those 11 years were in San Antonio, where he barely even played. Alternatively, despite having a longer career as of 2020, Zach LaVine is only 24. I'm gonna say he plays out this entire decade, suffers through some injuries, and follows the path of his 3.1 threes made per game he had last year, and averages around that same mark for the next 5 years before things begin to go downhill. 2,186 made threes by 2030 is my prediction. And there it is, a complete list of what the all-time three-pointers list will look like in the year 2030. Only 2 currently retired players crack the top 10, which is just insane to think about. Reggie Miller, who was number 1 on this list before 2011, now ranks 10th. Another really underrated part of this list that we didn't really dig deep into is the sheer depth of it. I was only really cracking at the surface when I talked about the major names, but there's guys like Jamal Murray, Karl Anthony Towns, Jason Tatum, Donovan Mitchell, Bojan Bogdanovic, Devin Booker, as well as a plethora of other players of this generation that might not rank extremely high on this all-time list, but they will be somewhere in the top 20, 30, or 50. Take a look at the top 50 list and you will pretty much see solely modern day players in a few years. That's insane. Check back to this video in another 10 years when you realize that all of my predictions have come true and I actually single-handedly control reality all by myself. But until then, goodbye. Actually, you don't have to come back in 10 years. I'd actually prefer you stick around and watch these other videos before that time comes. Please don't go, please. I don't have too many of you. Okay, I love you, bye.